We already looked at consoles that aged well, but there are some more that are worthy of recognition. Like in the last video, the consoles on this list are all here due to various reasons, which differ from system to system. A lot of times consoles age well because they're reliable, moddable, or versatile. Again, I'm only going to talk about consoles that I have experience with personally, and everything I say is my opinion, obviously. Let's start with the Nintendo GameCube. It's no secret that I love the GameCube, and I think it deserves to be on this list. The GameCube has many great games and a controller that is still liked by many people today. In fact, the GameCube controller works with Wii's, Wii U's, and Switches. Some games like Smash Bros. Melee, Luigi's Mansion, Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door, and Super Mario Sunshine are often regarded as some of the best GameCube exclusives. And the Game Boy player attachment is awesome, allowing you to play any Game Boy game on the big screen. Occasionally, I hear people say things about failing lasers, but I think that's something that happens with anything that uses optical media. The GameCube can be modded as well, but I've never tried it myself, so perhaps that's something worth exploring in the future. Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. Like the Super Nintendo, the Genesis is another console that I think aged well. The units are fairly reliable, and the graphics and sound are very distinctive and unique to the system. I like the controllers a lot, especially the 6-button version, which is great for fighting games, since they're lined up like how they would be on an arcade stick or arcade machine. And they also work with the Atari 2600, which is always a bonus. I personally prefer the SNES to the Genesis, but that's a matter of opinion, and I know there are people who prefer it, or like it just as much as the SNES. In terms of hardware, there are 3 generations. I've got 2 second-gen models myself. The first-gen Genesis is the most desirable, while the 3rd gen isn't very well liked due to the flimsy build quality and the fact that it doesn't support the 32X and CD add-ons. Speaking of add-ons, I've got a Sega CD, but without any hookups. One day I'll get all the cables for it. Maybe I should get myself another power strip too, just in case I stumble upon a 32X. Sega is often criticized for making these add-ons because they didn't end up helping the sales of the system, but they are interesting pieces of gaming history. And of course, like Nintendo, Sega has its own exclusives. And it has one big advantage over the Super Nintendo. It's cheap, which makes it a really good introduction to 16-bit gaming for someone who hasn't experienced something like that on real hardware before. Atari 2600. This is the oldest system on the list. There are some games that haven't aged all that well. I mean, it's a really old system, so that's to be expected. But there still are enough fun games to play, in my opinion. In terms of hardware reliability, I think the 2600 is doing quite well. It's not all that difficult to find one that works. I bought a 2600 Junior for $50 Canadian, and it came with a bunch of games, a couple of joysticks, and working paddle controllers. Pretty good deal if you ask me. I did a video on it recently, which you can see if you click on the card on the top right-hand corner. Age hasn't been kind to all systems, however, but the things that fail are usually caps, switches, and plugs. All reasonably easy to change yourself if you have to, and since it's not a portable system like the Sega Game Gear, for example, changing out these parts isn't too bad, even if you're a novice with the iron. Some people might question the inclusion of this console in this video, because you can make points of why it hasn't aged well, but it's all just an opinion, right? So I think in terms of cultural significance, it has aged very gracefully indeed. I think the Atari 2600 is so different to gaming today, and the old school gameplay, graphics, and sound is worthy of experiencing for yourself. The contrast between this and modern systems is what makes it so interesting. Nintendo DS. The GBA's successor is included in this list as well. You've got a few choices when it comes to hardware, from the original to the Lite and the DSi models. The DS has plenty of good games and is terribly cheap since it's so common, especially the DS Lite. The battery life on these things is amazing, doesn't matter which model. Some of my DSs haven't been turned on in years, and yet still have enough power for several hours of playing. It's pretty remarkable. I guess the DS isn't very power hungry. I'm not sure of the technical details behind this. Some people might argue that the DS, or specifically the DS Lite, can be considered as a system that didn't age well because of the cracking hinge problem. I've had mine for almost a decade and it works fine, but then again, I don't use it that often. On one hand, though, systems are cheap enough where you can replace broken units if necessary. You can fix it yourself also, though that can be a bit fiddly. Or you can just get an original DS or the later DSi and not worry about it. You can play GBA games with a DSi, but that's what the Game Boy Advance is for, right? Some of my favorite Pokemon games can be played on the system, and a backwards compatible DS is essential if you want to migrate Gen 3 Pokemon into the newest games. Flashcards are also a cool thing to play around with. I guess technically that's considered modding, right? I would say so. Things like flashcards are always good for older consoles because you can try out all kinds of different games, and I think that's always a good thing. I think that pretty much covers what I think. Hopefully you found the video interesting. I might do more videos like this if I manage to get hold of other systems. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.